Hello everyone. The establishment of the East India Company in 1600 and its transformation into a ruling body from a trading one in 1765 had little immediate impact on Indian polity and governance. But the period between 1773 and 1858 under the company rule and then under the British Crown till 1947 witnessed a plethora of constitutional and administrative changes. The nature and objective of these changes were to serve the British imperial ideology, but unintentionally they introduced elements of the modern state into India's political and administrative system. Constitutional development between 1773 and 1858. After the Battle of Buxar 1764, the English East India Company got the Diwani right to collect revenue of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. An annual subsidy was to be paid to the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II and an annual pension to the Nawab of Awadh Shuja ud Dawla. The company appointed two Indians as the deputy Diwans, Muhammad Reza Khan for Bengal and Raja Sitab Rai for Bihar. 1767. The first intervention in Indian affairs by the British government came in 1767. It demanded 10% share in the plunder amounting to £4 million annually. 1765 to 1772. The dual system of government where the company had the authority but no responsibility and its Indian representatives had all the responsibility but no authority continued for 7 years. This period was characterized by rampant corruption among servants of the company who made full use of private trading to enrich themselves, excessive revenue collection and oppression of peasantry, and the company's bankruptcy while the servants were flourishing. By now, the British government decided to regulate the company to bring some order into its business. From now, there would be a gradual increase in controlling laws. The Regulating Act of 1773. The 1773 Regulating Act brought about the British government's involvement in Indian affairs in the effort to control and regulate the functioning of the East India Company. It recognized that the company's role in India extended beyond mere trade to administrative and political fields and introduced the element of centralized administration. The directors of the company were required to submit all correspondence regarding revenue affairs and civil and military administration to the government. Thus, for the first time, the British cabinet was given the right to exercise control over Indian affairs. In Bengal, the administration was to be carried out by Governor General and a council consisting of four members representing civil and military government. They were required to function according to the majority rule. Warren Hastings and four others were named in the act. Later ones were to be appointed by the company. A Supreme Court of Judicature was to be established in Bengal with original and appellate jurisdictions where all subjects could seek redressal. In practice, however, the Supreme Court had a debatable jurisdiction vis-a-vis the Council, which created various problems. The Governor General could exercise some powers over Bombay and Madras, again a vague provision which created many problems. The whole scheme was based on checks and balances. Amendments 1781. The jurisdiction of the Supreme Court was defined within Calcutta. It was to administer the personal law of the defendant. The servants of the government were immune if they did anything while discharging their duties. Social and religious usages of the subjects were to be honored. Pitt's India Act of 1784. The Pitt's India Act gave the British government a large measure of control over the company's affairs. In fact, the company became a subordinate department of the state. The company's territories in India were termed British possessions. The government's control over the company's affairs was greatly extended. A board of control consisting of the Chancellor of Exchequer, a Secretary of State, and four members of the Privy Council to be appointed by the Crown were to exercise control over the company's civil, military, and revenue affairs. All dispatches were to be approved by the board. Thus, a dual system of control was set up. In India, the Governor General was to have a council of three, including the Commander in Chief, and the presidencies of Bombay and Madras were made subordinate to the Governor General. A general prohibition was placed on aggressive wars and treaties breached often. The Act of 1786. Cornwallis wanted to have the powers of both the Governor General and the Commander in Chief. The new Act considered this demand and also gave him the power. Cornwallis was allowed to override the Council's decision if he owned the responsibility for the decision. Later, this provision was extended to all Governors Generals. The Charter Act of 1793. The Act renewed the company's commercial privileges for the next 20 years. The company, after paying the necessary expenses, interest, dividends, salaries, etc., from the Indian revenues, was to pay 5 lakh pounds annually to the British government. The royal approval was mandated for the appointment of the Governor General, the Governors, and the Commander in Chief. Senior officials of the company were debarred from leaving India without permission. Doing so was treated as resignation. The company was empowered to give licenses to individuals as well as the company's employees to trade in India. The license, known as privilege or country trade, paved the way for shipments of opium to China. The revenue administration was separated from the judiciary functions, and this led to disappearing of the Mal Adalats. The home government members were to be paid out of Indian revenues, which continued up to 1919. The Charter Act of 1813. In England, the business interests were pressing for an end to the company's monopoly over trade in India because of a spirit of laissez-faire and the continental system by Napoleon, by which the European ports were closed for Britain. The 1813 Act sought to redress these grievances. The company's monopoly over trade in India ended, but the company retained the trade with China and the trade in tea. The company's shareholders were given a 10.5% dividend on the revenue of India. The company was to retain the possession of territories and the revenue for 20 more years without prejudice to the sovereignty of the crown. Thus, the constitutional position of the British territories in India was defined explicitly for the first time. Powers of the Board of Control were further enlarged. A sum of 1 lakh rupees was to be set aside for the revival, promotion, and encouragement of literature, learning, and science among the natives of India every year. This was an important statement from the point of state's responsibility for education. The regulations made by the councils of Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta were now required to be laid before the British Parliament. The constitutional position of the British territories in India was thus explicitly defined for the first time. Separate accounts were to be kept regarding commercial transactions and territorial revenues. The power of superintendence and direction of the Board of Control was not only defined but also enlarged considerably. Christian missionaries were also permitted to come to India and preach their religion. The Charter Act of 1833. The lease of 20 years to the company was further extended. The territories of India were to be governed in the name of the Crown. The company's monopoly over trade with China and tea also ended. All restrictions on European immigration and the acquisition of property in India were lifted. Thus, the way was paved for the wholesale European colonization of India. In India, a financial, legislative, and administrative centralization of the government was envisaged. The Governor General was given the power to superintend, control, and direct all civil and military affairs of the company. Bengal, Madras, Bombay, and all other territories were placed under complete control of the Governor General. All revenues were to be raised under the authority of the Governor General, who would have complete control over the expenditure too. The governments of Madras and Bombay were drastically deprived of their legislative powers and left with the right of proposing to the Governor General the projects of law which they thought to be expedient. A law member was added to the Governor General's Council for professional advice on lawmaking. Indian laws were to be codified and consolidated. No Indian citizen was to be denied employment under the company on the basis of religion, color, birth, descent, etc. Although the reality was different, this declaration formed the sheet anchor of political agitation in India. The administration was urged to take steps to ameliorate the conditions of slaves and to ultimately abolish slavery. Slavery was abolished in 1843. The Charter Act of 1853. The company was to continue possessions of territories unless the parliament provided otherwise. The strength of the court of directors was reduced to 18. The company's patronage over the services was dissolved. The services were now thrown open to a competitive examination. The law member became the full member of the Governor General's Executive Council. The separation of the executive and legislative functions of the government of British India progressed with the inclusion of six additional members for the legislative purposes. Local representation was introduced in the Indian legislature. The legislative wing came to be known as the Indian Legislative Council. However, a law to be promulgated needed the assent of the Governor General, and the Governor General could veto any bill of the Legislative Council. The Act for Better Government of India 1858. The 1857 revolt had exposed the company's limitations in administering under a complex situation. Till then, there had not been much accountability. The 1858 Act sought to rectify this anomaly. India was to be governed by and in the name of the Crown through a Secretary of State and a Council of 15. The initiative and the final decision was to be with the Secretary of State, and the Council was to be just advisory in nature. Thus, the dual system introduced by the Pitt's India Act came to an end. Governor General became the Viceroy, his prestige, if not authority, increased. The assumption of power by the Crown was one of formality rather than substance. It gave a decent burial to an already dead horse, the company's administration. Like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you. Bye.